Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of When I Grow Up. On today's episode, it's my pleasure to welcome my guest, Pastor Jason Min. Hey Jason, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sure you are probably had a long day, so it's evening time for those of you that don't know, and I'm just so grateful for your time today, so thanks again.
No, thank you for having me. And we're both parents, so we know that 8 p.m. is when our day officially starts,
Yes,
right?
that's
So,
correct. That's correct. Um, So, Pastor Jason is here to talk about his job and his career, but more than that, I'm so excited to hear your journey and story. So, he is a pastor of a church in Los Angeles, and I'm going to just stop right there because I'm going to let you talk. I know nothing. I actually I had to stop myself from Googling you because I try not to know things about people because I realize I'm not as inquisitive like if I know things beforehand.
hmm.
So um so Pastor Jason, can you tell me about what it is that you do?
Yeah, I pastor a church in downtown Los Angeles. So, we're really in the heart of Los Angeles, called Citizens. And we are a predominantly Asian American congregation. Um, a little bit of a history about our church. Our church was originally planted by Pastor Alex Choi, and it was
Mm-hmm.
a church called Sovereign Grace back in 2007. I came to be the worship director of that church in 2013. And then in 2019, we kind of relaunched the church. We kind of replanted the church as Citizens in a new location with a new vision and leadership. So, in some sense, a lot of people say that like this is a new church plant, and I guess in some sense we are new. And we're, even if you include that time as Sovereign Grace, we're still a fairly young church, I would
Mm.
say, relative to other churches. But yeah, like in many ways, we have a lot of that same community from the Sovereign Grace days, but now also like brand new faces as well.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
hmm
That's so interesting. Is it the same sovereign? Is there only one sovereign
No,
grace?
so that's it. Not no connection to the other Sovereign Grace, the one with a lot of turmoil right now. So,
Okay. Well, I don't really know
oh,
about
okay.
that, but I guess what I was gonna ask is, I some really good songs are written by a church called Sovereign Grace. Is that you guys?
So we did release an album, but I'm pretty sure you're talking about the other. There's a mega church kind of ministry called Sovereign Grace.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. So I guess I was gonna ask you about like church planting and stuff. But what was that transition like for you then? From going from Sovereign Grace and kind of quote unquote rebranding, I guess, to Citizens, and why did you guys decide to do that?
Yeah. So, how much time do you have?
A lot. I have all
Okay,
the
good.
time in the world.
Um, yeah. So, essentially, Sovereign Grace, just to give you a little bit of history, Sovereign Grace was originally planted in LA to be a church for people who hated church and hated
Mm.
pastors. And there are a lot of them. It was kind of I would say it was like almost like the anti church.
Hmm.
They met in a like a small building in the arts district in LA before the arts district is what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely diverse, multi-ethnic, no kind of fancy production, no fog machines, no lights, just solid gospel preaching. And it was a liturgical service, and so it was kind of um, it was kind of a weird there was a weird dissonance because a lot of the people that were coming were young, like artists, creatives, but the service itself had kind of like an old school vibe to it. And, you know, basically that church grew to become extremely large.
Mm.
Um, it was kind of when the big explosion of growth happened was in a time in LA when a lot of there was movement in a lot of immigrant churches where kind of a lot of second generation Korean Americans were leaving their immigrant churches
Mhm.
either because they kind of wanted to find faith for themselves or because they were disillusioned by the
Mm.
church or disillusioned by certain things they'd seen. And so the church kind of attracted a lot of those people. And then it kind of became a predominantly Asian American congregation. So I was hired as part of like a big kind of, I guess, like a big hiring, like, yeah, spree that the church went
Mm.
on because they
Okay.
needed help. And so I was living in Philadelphia at the time. And so my wife and we uprooted our lives there. We had been married 1 year. I had zero in intention to be a pastor or go into ministry. My wife had zero intention of marrying a pastor or someone in ministry.
Wow.
But we were about 9 months into marriage, and this opportunity came up, and one thing led to another, and we were driving cross country to take this role. And so um, was that was full time worship director of that church for from 2013 to 2019,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, in 2019, really felt God kind of. So I joke around a lot that I have an existential crisis every 5 to 6 years, and I had an existential crisis then, and there was a part of me that felt like, okay, um, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but my background is both in music and education. And
Mm.
so the question being like, now we had, you know, um, two kids, and, was I going to continue to do worship and be in the kind of worship sphere? Was I going to move to becoming a more traditional teaching pastor?
Mm.
There was a lot of questions. And so, um, I went back to finish seminary at that time, and in those first few months back in seminary in early 2019, my wife and I really felt called to plant a church. And the church that we kind of were thinking about, it was kind of a crazy idea, and it was nothing like a traditional church. And they always say that every church plant comes out of some kind of holy discontent. So some kind of
Mm.
something that maybe you see when you look at the church, um, not necessarily like criticizing it, but because you love what the church could be. A lot of times where church plants come out of is a desire to maybe try something different and reimagine a different kind of community. And being in LA for 6 years, and we, to be honest, like we felt like we loved our community at Sovereign Grace. It was our family. We had you know both our children there. We went through so much
Mm.
with that community. My wife
Mhm.
during that time lost her mother to lung
Oh,
cancer,
goodness.
and so our community kind of came alongside and
Sure,
walked with us
yeah.
the entire way. And so, I mean, it was definitely our home. So, we loved this church, but kind of zooming out and thinking about like the church capital C, there were a lot of things that we were seeing that strangely enough, I think the pandemic just really continued to bring out.
Mm.
But a few things that we kind of were noticing was like one was a huge divide between the pulpit and the pew. And what I mean by that is where ministry more and more felt like it was in the hands of just a few kind of people who were seen as the elite Christians, and then everyone else was kind of just consuming the religious goods and services that those elite Christians were offering them. Especially in LA,
Mm,
consumerism is
sure.
has a stronghold in our city. And then the second thing we were noticing was a huge divide between sacred and secular, where um, there was such a compartmentalization of faith where people saw their faith as something you did for an hour on Sunday morning that
Yes.
really had no impact on the way they lived their lives from Monday through Saturday. It wasn't impacting the way they raised their kids or the decisions they were making, how they spent their money.
Mm.
And so we felt this burden to plant a very specific kind of community. I'm so sorry. Am I talking too much right now?
No, this is
Okay.
great. I'm
Okay.
I'm just really fascinated by all of it, and I have so many questions. A lot of thoughts just come to mind, and I'm in agreement in a lot of what you're saying. So that's why my face is probably like in a daze.
Please, and at any point you can stop me and tell me to stop
No,
talking.
no,
But
this is wonderful. I
okay,
Please
great.
keep going.
And so my wife has been in fashion, so that's her industry, and she's been in fashion ever since she graduated college. She was in on the buying side for a while. Now she's
Hmm.
on the sales side.
Okay.
So kind of like business is her sphere. Um, for me, like my sphere. So again, just to give you a little bit of background, I did the good first son of a Korean immigrant family thing. I went to UPenn for undergrad. Thought I was gonna potentially. I wanted to be an anchor man. That's kind of why I went to. And then my junior year of college, made this decision to like instead of doing that to go into education.
Uh-huh.
So then I got my master's in education at Harvard.
Oh gosh, you are a
And
genius.
no, 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 not at all, not at all. And then I did the unthinkable, and I did what, like I basically uh, pursued every Korean parent's nightmare, which was like to spend all that money on an Ivy League education and then tell my parents that I wanted to be a musician full time.
Oh my goodness.
Um,
Okay, I need to hear more of this. Like, what do you
yeah,
mean a
so,
musician? Like
so like
performing?
basically, like after grad school, I told my parents I'm going back to Philly to start a band, and I'm just gonna do music.
Holy smokes.
I know, I know, I know. I mean, so like my younger brother, he's an actor, and so I always joke around with people that between the two of us, we have accomplished the forbidden trifecta of Korean. It's ministry, acting, and entertainment and music.
That is so
Um,
funny. Oh my gosh.
so
But
yeah,
your
so
brother is a very successful actor, I should add.
he is a successful actor. Yeah. He had some dark days, but he's been doing great
Yeah, I mean,
now.
after
So
Tim's story, I feel like that's pretty normal, right? Like
very
having dark
normal.
days as an actor.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I just I mean, shout out to Tim.
Yes.
Like having like rubbed shoulders with so many different actors in LA, and my brother would attest to this as well.
Mm.
You will not find another human being like Tim, really, like in the acting world or just in humanity in
Oh
general.
no. Trust me. After my one conversation with him, I am like a huge fan of Tim Joe.
Yes. Yes, I know.
'Cause
Usually, I'm sure like you expect, like, usually when you have a conversation with someone, kind of like they come down from the pedestal a little bit,
no,
but
no.
with Tim, it always elevates.
Yes. My husband and I both have like a small crush on Tim. Just cuz like you're right, he is like um exactly what you said, but I think for me it was just like you can't hide a person's character, and it just was exuding as he was talking about his life and his experiences. So, yes, I'm in complete agreement. But
Yeah, and
um
one quick story about him
yes.
and my brother.
Uh-huh.
When my brother first moved to LA, he really saw Tim as kind of a mentor figure
Mm,
to him. And one of the first experiences my brother had that I think speaks to like who Tim is, but also I think it speaks to like when people ask, how do you kind of live out your faith in the workplace, like
yeah,
outside of church?
yeah,
And I think a lot of times we think it's, oh, like when you're in the waiting room for an audition, you like turn to someone and you start evangelizing to them. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think like when a person follows it, when a person is has a relationship with Jesus, like everything they
yeah.
do kind of exudes and embodies the gospel. And so, like for example, like my brother was telling me that Tim and he happened to be auditioning for the same role.
Uh-huh.
That happens a lot
I'm
when it
sure.
comes to Asian American actors because there's just um, so little roles. And like Tim went in first for his audition, and after he came out of the audition, like my brother was later on in the day, Tim called my brother and did like a thing that you never do as an actor because you're going to hundreds of auditions and you're just waiting for that one opportunity.
Right,
He
right.
basically calls my brother and he's like, "Hey, I think actually this is the perfect role for you, and this is what they're going to ask you to do. This is what you should prepare for. Just letting you know, they'll probably have you do this part." And it's just unthinkable. And especially if you're in the industry for a while and you've experienced like most actors who've been doing it for a long time are extremely jaded and disillusioned,
Mm,
understandably so.
yeah.
But then you hear a story like that, and that is like, to me, that is the embodied gospel.
Yeah, I mean, that's insane. Did Justin get the role?
I don't know if he got the role, but
Um,
that moment meant so much to
yeah,
him.
I'm sure. And even for me, like, it's tempting to like wanna ask those questions to an actor or somebody, like, you wanna ask, like, oh, do you take on the roles that are not, of like line up with your faith and things like that. I didn't ask those things, but I like
Hmm.
wanted to. But he answered it even before I had asked it because he just said, when you go to set or you go anywhere, if you have a relationship with Jesus, you just bring Jesus with you.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter what you're doing. And I was like, yes. How that's the answer. Like, and I was even myself, I'm like, am I doing that daily? Like so good. It was so good. Yeah.
And you are. I think this podcast is a perfect example of that. So,
But man, that's a great story. It's a really
but
good one.
anyway, sorry. Back to that.
Yes,
We
you
could
were a
definitely.
musician. You
I
went
could
and
spend this
started a
entire yeah.
band.
Yeah, so just started a band, and I did take a job like to make ends meet back at Penn, kind of doing urban education work,
Okay.
connecting the university to West Philly, which at the time was a very underserved community, and
Hmm.
so I did have a passion for that. That's what I studied in grad school, and so I was doing that, and then had that existential crisis 5 years later because I was doing music full time for a bit and, was grinding. I mean, so many, like even your episode of Kevin and so many of like, it resonates because, that
Mm,
struggle is real. And especially in Philly, it's so different from LA, where
mm,
if you're a musician in Philly, the question everyone asks after you say you're a musician is, well, what is your real job or what is your backup plan?
right,
Whereas like
right.
in LA, it's one of the most amazing things about pastoring a church out here is
Mm,
you meet people and 7 out of 10 are aspiring artists, graphic designers,
creatives, yeah.
photographers, creatives. So culture, it's so different, but yeah, so I mean, 5 years later, was trying to, at some point I needed to eat. So I was like, let's put this education to use. So I started an SAT academy in Philadelphia. It was like
What?
yeah, like for K through 12. it was like college consulting, but also like after school tutoring and SAT prep. And so I did that. And then when I took the Sovereign Grace position, ended up selling the academy off to three guys who, like, thankfully, like they took it to the next level. They expanded it to a couple more
Oh,
locations, and so
wow.
thankfully it's been doing really well. And yeah, so anyways, all that to say, that's kind of where my background is in music and education. And so, kind of fast forwarding back to the church plant,
Uh-huh.
neither my wife or I were ever kind of, we didn't really see full time vocational ministry anywhere in our future. And so, even the kind of church community or church plant we were thinking of, we just, our minds don't really think kind of
Mm.
traditionally like that. And so, um, at the time we were praying and discerning what kind of a community we personally would want to be a part of, and we kind of stumbled on this passage in Ephesians 4, where Jesus basically, Paul is talking about Jesus who has ascended, and he basically talks about how, when Jesus ascends,
Mhm.
he gives apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers,
Mhm. Mhm.
to basically be the church,
Mhm.
to be the fullness of the body of Christ. And we took that and we said, like apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers, like this is what Jesus envisioned for the body of Christ. And then we kind of combined that with Jesus calling the church a city on a hill. And so there was this idea of like calling us to be a city and then calling us to be these
These
five
things.
kind of, yeah. And so we said, who are the apostles in our city,
Mm.
in LA? And we said, I think they're the entrepreneurs. They're the
Mm.
ones who start things from scratch. They see problems and they find solutions to those problems.
Mm.
Then we said, who are the prophets in our city? And we said, I think they're the creatives. They're the ones who speak truth to power. They
Mm.
um, they kind of expose the brokenness of our humanity,
Mm.
but they also show us beauty. um, who are the evangelists of our city, the people who gather um, groups of people around in spaces. And we said, I think they're the hospitality workers, the coffee
Mm.
shop owners, the restaurant workers who bring people around a table to break bread. Who are the shepherds in our community, the parents and the healthcare workers, the people day to day caring for their loved ones, caring for people who are sick emotionally, physically, spiritually, and then who are the teachers,
Mm.
the teachers,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we said, like, what would it look like if we were somehow able to get all five of those entrepreneurs, creatives, parents, hospitality workers, and teachers all in one space together to form kind of a city within a city, And so, because thankfully, like, um, the one good thing about going to Penn and, having best friends and groomsmen who are all Wharton grads, we kind of decided we were going to like create this deck that we were going to fundraise and find investors for kind of like to essentially buy a large space in
Uh-huh.
LA. And we had talked to, thankfully we have friends who are coffee shop owners here
Mm.
in LA who basically agreed to, hey, if you can get us this amount of money, we will build a coffee shop in this space. Then we talked to some of our friends who are entrepreneurs. At the time, Tim's wife is
That's
was
right.
yeah was an entrepreneur running her own kind of floral business. We had talked to different entrepreneurs. What would it look like about working out of this space?
Mm.
Maybe also creating a small co-working space there, where a lot of people working remotely can use that space. And then we had talked to kind of our friends who were creatives, aspiring actors and musicians, we said, hey, if we created a kind of like an after school learning center here in this space as well, would you be willing to come? We know all musicians need part-time jobs. Would you be willing to come teach music after school? And then at night, you could use that space for rehearsal space, studio space, performing arts space. And then essentially the church would just rent that space on Sundays. And the idea was that we're trying to move away again from that 1 hour event on Sunday and see
Yeah.
like all of life as sacred. And so, like, what would it look like for hospitality workers and parents bringing their kids, rubbing shoulders with creatives, teaching their kids, supporting them as they do their art, people using the co-working space. And so where people kind of walk in and say, this feels like LA, a coffee shop, musicians, like that's so LA, and yet this feels kind of different too. And so it was the idea was to create these small communal hubs that reflect kind of the city, but more than anything reflect the values of heaven. And so the idea being that we're citizens of LA but citizens of heaven. And at the time we thought to ourselves, what would be a great name for like a space like this? And we said citizens, because we could see that being a name of a coffee shop, but also a name of a learning center and the name of,
Yes.
and so the idea was our dream would have been to create a Citizens LA, and then a Citizens
Atlanta.
Atlanta, a Citizens NY, a Citizens SF, just these small communal hubs that could be cities within a city. And it's like, we're living in a post-Christian context where there is not really a cultural pull to go to church anymore.
Uh-huh.
And so to ask like your friend who's not a believer to like come out to the Sunday service can be a bit overwhelming,
Sure.
but what if you go to, you're going to this coffee shop every day, and what if you and your parent friend are sending your kids to that same learning center every day? It's not much of a stretch to say, hey, by the way, like there's a church that meets here on Sunday. Why don't you come with me? You're familiar with the space. We do life here together. And so, to try to help people kind of view church a little bit differently, to kind of again bridge those divides, and then to see teachers and those coffee shop owners and the entrepreneurs alongside pastors to be able to say, hey, we're all doing ministry together in this city and we need each other, especially because of where the world is right now. And so
Yeah.
that was kind of like the dream.
Uh-huh.
um
How's the
and
dream going?
well, okay, so then there's a plot twist, okay?
Okay.
Because
Okay.
then we were like so set on this, we
Yeah.
were getting ready to present this, and then in early 2019, the lead pastor of Sovereign Grace said, I shared with him this vision,
Mhm.
and he loved it. But then he said, hey, like I'm actually gonna step down. I feel God calling me to something else, and the leadership and I would like you to step in
Oh
into this
my
role.
goodness.
And it was like a weird moment because like we were like, what are you doing, God? Because
Yeah.
that's not what we necessarily signed up for.
Right.
Um, you know, like now we were being asked to lead a church that was very much more of a traditional church.
Mm.
Um, mind you, like I've never like preached every week. By that point I'd probably preached a total of like 15 sermons in my entire life. You know, I had never led any kind of organization or church that large of that
Mhm.
size. Um, and so like in some sense it was half feeling extremely inadequate
Mhm.
and like feeling like, oh, there's no way I could do that. But two, feeling just a sense of like, but then there's this other thing that we've really wanted to do, and I don't think we could do this
Right.
if we step into this.
Right.
And so at first my wife and I were very resistant to that idea, and we were extremely encouraged and flattered that they thought of us.
Yeah.
But our initial gut response was to say no. Um, but at the time, like we were I was reading this book called Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and
Hmm.
he
Hmm.
in the book he has this quote where he says, "People who love community destroy it, but people who love people create community wherever they go." And that really spoke to me because
Mm.
the idea was that sometimes when you fall so in love with a very specific ideal of what you want your community to be,
Hmm.
you end up like actually like neglecting the very people God has placed right in front of
Right.
you,
Yes.
and God has entrusted to your care. And so that really humbled us a lot, and we realized that, hey, this is a community that we do love deeply, full of
Mm.
people we do love deeply, and
Mm.
there's this opportunity that God is giving us, even though we feel completely inadequate. And this is not how we scripted it out.
Mhm.
Like, let's just take a step in faith, and like, we may have to kill this vision because there's no way, like, we may see this as more of a 10 to 15-year project that but our priority should be to care for these congregation members. And
Wow.
so we kind of had our like Abraham Isaac moment and kind
Sure.
of killed, but we
Yeah.
actually felt like we killed that vision and
Yeah.
then stepped into this. And our only ask was that if we step into this, can we actually change the name and kind
Mm.
of replant the church in a
Mm.
new location that is more maybe aligned with our vision to be more rooted in our city? And then can we bring our own leadership, which was the launch team of this, the original
Original
Citizens Vision?
citizens. I see.
And, the leadership graciously said yes. And so that's exactly what we did. We kind of said, okay. And then November of 2019, we became,
Gosh.
we moved to a new location where we are right now, a high
Uh-huh.
school, and we launched as Citizens, um, with a new vision, new location, new leadership. And then 4 months later,
Right.
the entire world shut down.
It,
And so
oh
it was like I mean, it was just God. Every time, every step of the way, it was like, "What are you
man.
doing, God?"
Right. Yeah.
Um, but I tell everyone. I mean, though I would never wish 2020 on anyone ever
Mm.
again. It was an interesting moment because for us, it was like a gift
Mm.
because like we kind of took a step out in faith and then just said we're just gonna maintain the way church has been going, and then all of a sudden 4 months in, everything, every preconceived notion about church
Yeah.
just like completely shattered,
Right.
and the
Yes.
huge reset button, the 1 hour Sunday event was gone,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and now people had to figure out, what does faith look like
Yes.
when it's just me
Mm-hmm.
Monday through Sunday, or me and my family Monday through Sunday, without events, without programs. And so, like, in a lot of ways, we were able to lean in more deeply into the
Mm.
original, like, DNA of
Yeah.
Citizens.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, at every step at every moment, it was like this huge, like, what are you doing, God? And then
Mm.
in hindsight, it was like, no, like, this was the plan all
Mm-hmm.
along. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh
am
my
so
gosh.
sorry. That was a mouthful,
It
but
was it was so great and it's so you're right. It was a lot and I'm wrapping my head around everything because like all of it is just so so God. I don't know like, because like, so many things happened. I do want to rewind just a little bit if you
yes,
don't
please.
mind. Um when you said that you and your wife decided to take up the position at Sovereign Grace when you were living in Philadelphia, like what was that? Was there something like was there a calling or were you what was there something that happened or because you had mentioned that you had never thought about going into ministry
Y-
vocationally full time.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And, like I was having one of my existential crises. And, the way that anyone who's done an SAT Academy, in Korean, it's Hagwon,
Mhm.
anyone who's ever done one and kind of gets past that like third year mark and then things are going well. And so the academy was doing well. And the thing about it is it's very cyclical because,
Okay.
there's a fall semester, a
Sure,
spring
yeah.
semester, summer, and then the students just, you basically, once they're in the system, you have them
Mhm,
forever.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so there was a part of me that said, okay, am I like, I could definitely do this and I could see myself like 20 years later waking up and having just been like a Hagwon owner,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
not there's anything wrong with that. But the
Sure.
question for me that I was posing to myself is, was I okay with that?
Mm.
And my wife has kind of seen me through like even my music days and when I was starting the Hagwon and, kind of has been with me throughout that process. And so even she was asking, like, we're comfortable and we're fine, but is that what you really want to do? And so when this opportunity came up, I think if someone said, like, hey, do you want to be a pastor at our church? I think that would have been an easy no. But it was like an interesting thing because it was like, do you want to come be a worship director in LA? And I'm from Cerritos, so my parents are here.
Okay,
So for
okay.
me, it was like on many levels, it was like you get to go home. Um, like, you get to go back to your hometown.
Mhm.
And the way that the job was presented to me was, okay, you're gonna be a big part of your job is gonna be doing music, and you have to and caring for like other creatives and musicians. And just by being in nature of LA, most of the people on the worship team at the church are going to be aspiring musicians.
Mhm,
So it was
mhm,
that,
mhm.
which like I have a huge heart for that. Then they said the
Mm.
second thing is, yeah, we'd love for you to also be able to do some teaching,
Mm.
if you can. And education being my background, I said to myself, oh, like great. And then they said, our church is only 5 years old. So in some sense, you kind of might have to wear an entrepreneur hat a little bit and do a lot of different things. And we're kind of still in startup mode.
Been there,
And
done
so,
that.
been there, done that, so it like in a weird way, it presented like almost like the culmination of everything I had done up to that point.
Yeah.
And then for my wife, it wasn't the hardest sell because she was in New York. We were long
Mm.
distance for 4.5 years of our dating relationship because she was working in New York doing fashion. But once we got married, it was probably the better, more stable financial decision for her to move down to Philly.
Mm.
But in Philly, there's really nothing in fashion,
Sure, okay, yeah.
and so like LA was an interesting proposition
Mm.
for her
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well
yeah.
because she knew she could probably find something pretty quickly. And LA also being one of the hubs of the fashion industry. And so kind of like a lot of the pieces were aligned, which is
Right.
why,
It
but she
kinda
did
just
feel kind of like baited, like she felt like it was a little bit of a bait and switch, because like when she married me, she did not marry
a
anyone going
pastor.
into ministry. Yeah. Yeah. So
That's funny. Oh my goodness. So everything I mean, so basically, the culmination of your life led up to this moment is what you're saying.
no, exactly, exactly. We had no choice at that point.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. That's so crazy. Can I ask you when you, began your relationship with Jesus? Like, was it in high school or like when did that happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the church, and
Okay.
so as long as I remember, um, like I really do see myself as having been raised into the faith.
Mhm.
So like I would say obviously I probably had like that like like that real
Mhm.
like emotional moment when I
Sure.
went to my first youth retreat in 6th grade. Um, but like for example, like at our church, we baptize infants. You know, I know not
Mhm.
all churches baptize infants, but at our church we baptize infants. And one of the things I always say is, like we want these children one day to make their own profession of faith, and we
Mm.
want them to claim this identity for themselves. But it would be foolish to say that like if and when that moment happens, that moment happened like in a vacuum.
Mm.
And like when I look at my kids as well, it's like um, I pray that one day they would have a relationship with Jesus and claim that relationship for themselves. But I know that even that moment is going to have been the culmination of just the ways that they've been loved and cared for by this
Yeah.
community and raised into the faith. And I really feel like that was my journey with Jesus as
What a
well. So
blessing that is,
huge
man.
blessing. Yeah.
So great. Okay, so you went to be a worship director at Sovereign Grace.
Hmm.
For those listening, I'm probably gonna title this episode, when I grow up, I want to be a pastor. So, for those maybe that are listening and are interested in um going into ministry and being a pastor, um, what point did you decide to go to seminary?
Yeah. So I decided to go to seminary right when I moved.
Okay,
Um,
okay. Oh, so like right when you came from Philly.
Yeah, right when I came
Okay.
from Philly, not necessarily because I thought that that was going to lead to me becoming a pastor,
Uh-huh.
um, but more so like it was two things. One was my wife being like, "Yo, we're not going to uproot our entire lives here just for you to go lead worship somewhere in
Mm.
LA." Like I want there to be
I'd love to
like
meet your wife one day.
she's 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 spicy. I
Yeah.
think you would love her. Yeah. But so it was like, I want there to be like basically a plan.
Mm.
And she was like, unless you want to like if this is it's still full-time ministry.
Mhm.
And so that was one, but the other side of it is that like personally, like I love to learn.
I can
um
tell.
oh, and so like I think like you know I wanted to do a good job, and I
Mm.
wanted to learn and be like theologically trained, because as having led worship, and I'm sure your husband can attest to this as well, like it's such a weighty responsibility,
Yeah. Yeah.
to it's it's half the service is the singing and the
Yes.
praise. And so I wanted to make sure like I had a theological foundation. And so
Mm.
I started seminary then. I went at a snail's pace because I was working full time, so I could only take like one or two classes
Mhm.
a quarter. And then I mentioned this earlier, but we had so many like life events happen as well, that kind of kept dragging it out. So that's why I was still back in seminary in 2019. So
Oh,
6 years
okay.
later. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Hmm.
that's really encouraging because maybe one day if I decide to start seminary, I don't feel so rushed, like
Yes. No.
like
Yeah. Take your time. And I find actually like in a weird way, um, parents
Mm.
who like I some of my class a lot of my classmates were just out of college, but a lot of my classmates were also like people who'd been in the real world for a while, or parents who, now that their kids were a little older, they had
Mhm.
time to study. And I would say this is a generalization, but it was always the people who were a little older, and especially those with kids,
Mhm.
who for whom I think seminary was just so life giving. Because
Wow.
there is that like saying that seminary is like more like
Yes.
cemetery,
Yes,
for most
I
people.
hear that often actually. It's kind of
Yeah.
scary.
And, I do think there are like, I definitely don't know that seminary is for everyone. And I think seminary is kind of overrated too.
Mm.
But I find that like you just see like this like hunger to like learn.
Mm.
And then people who've kind of like, I'm sure as a mom, you know this to such a greater degree, but like they're so much more like efficient with their time, you know?
You have to be, it's no
You know,
choice.
so good at multitasking, and so like they're always like
Mm.
there on time, ready to learn, hungry, and so all that to
Well, I
say
guess that's something
encouragement.
maybe I can look forward to soon, but,
Yeah.
well, okay, man, your life is so, complex, Pastor
Hey, very,
Jason.
very complex. Yeah.
And in the
Frustrating.
best ways possible. I just have so many questions and so many different tangents, and I'm trying to, like,
No,
stay
please.
focused on what it is that I'm trying to ask, but, you were saying oh, just a quick side note. So, like, what do you play?
So I am a guitarist.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean I was like a singer-songwriter for a little
Oh,
bit.
wow.
So after the band, then I did kind of my own solo stuff for a bit. Um,
Is this all available,
but
like, to the public? Can
it
I just
is,
Google
but
it?
I choose not to mention where you can find it.
Okay. Well, I know what I'm doing after this episode. But, okay, so, um, you finished seminary then?
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm curious to, do you find that, um oh man, sorry. I'm so sorry. My thoughts are so jumbled right now.
No, go
I
for it.
apologize.
My
But
life is jumbled, so it works out. Yeah.
um so like what has been the most challenging thing for you now as a kind of newly replanted church? I know the pandemic, I'm sure, was interesting for you guys. I can't imagine, like, and as you were explaining, it was a really a time for people to kind of face their own reality of maybe
Hmm.
where they stood in their faith or maybe lack thereof. Even here in Atlanta, the culture was exactly that. I can speak to my own church where people were just going through it or realizing that they didn't have anything at all. And it was really eye opening for a lot of us. But I can't imagine having to, like, you just started church in November 2019, and then all of a sudden it's like, what do we do? We don't, no one has a framework for this.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, what were some challenges that you faced, maybe not just through the pandemic, but even just like starting a church as a new head pastor?
Yeah. I mean, like it was like being thrown into the deep end
Mm.
because when I first took the role, I met up with all the lead pastors that I could think of, my mentors, but also people in this area, and I asked them, what should I expect, and many of them would say things like, well, as a lead pastor, you're probably going to have to lead your congregation through seasons of transition. You're going to have to walk with people through a lot of grief.
Mm.
You're going to have to probably tackle some difficult social issues.
Mm.
You may have to like wade into like kind of like having to talk about politics. But they were kind of like, but don't worry, there are seasons for all of these things.
Mm.
You're never going to have to do them at the same time.
Yeah.
But then 2020 happened, and then it was all at the same time,
Mm.
because it was like, um, yeah, there was so much grief. Very early on in the pandemic, we had people in our congregation lose loved ones to COVID. So
Yeah.
COVID was like extremely real for us
Yeah.
early on. There was the transition of being just even trying to establish an identity as a new church.
Yeah.
And then kind of people dealing with so much mental health issues, loneliness, depression, anxiety during the pandemic,
Mm.
marital issues, like marriages really struggled
Yeah.
during the
Yeah.
pandemic, our marriage included.
Yeah.
Um, and and then that's not even we haven't even gotten to all the social issues,
Yes.
from racial justice, to now with Roe v. Wade.
Yes.
just so many different things. And so I would say, I think if I could pinpoint, like, I would say navigating, especially like our current kind of like the current division in our country
Mhm.
has been probably the most challenging thing
Within
as a
your
pastor.
congregation or just like as a public figure in a church setting or all of the
Um,
above?
yeah, maybe all of the above, but
Mm,
I'm an extremely non-confrontational person.
right.
I'm not a like take the bull by the horns kind of
Mm.
person. I'm not sure if you're into Enneagram, but I'm a 9 on the Enneagram.
I don't know
Uh,
much, but I know nines are pretty peaceful people.
yeah, we're called the peacemakers and we're
Right.
conflict averse.
Uh-huh.
And, so there are many days, I think, during the past couple of years when I really felt like I should not be in this role, because
Mm,
sometimes I would feel like our congregation needs like someone to just be like, this is what we believe,
I
this is
see.
how we're standing, and this is where we're going.
Mm,
But that's just not my MO. And
mm,
and I myself am wrestling through these issues in real time. So the challenge of like, one, having to shepherd a congregation that comes from different, you know, political backgrounds, have they all have different experiences.
mhm.
Even when we were talking about racial justice, being in LA, you have people who lived through the riots,
Yeah.
whose parents had stores during the riots, and so like to be kind of wrestling through it yourself, and
Yeah.
you like trying to kind of like asking for God for wisdom for yourself, for your
Mhm.
own just like, you know, discipleship. But then like every Sunday being asked to get up there and give a statement to like hundreds of people
Right,
who
right.
are waiting for you to tell them what you think.
What should I think?
What should
Yeah.
I think? Like just the pressure, and
Mm,
and then feeling like I was letting people down,
mm.
or saying what some people maybe didn't want to hear. And so um yeah, that part has been emotionally draining.
I'm sure. Yeah, especially if you're an Enneagram 9, like it must be really difficult to have to face those things. I feel like yeah, what you just said, emotionally draining, knowing these things and it's really literally probably eating you up inside, wondering what people want or what they're thinking. It's
Yeah.
so hard. It's so hard.
And
Gosh.
then now that everything's kind of recorded, like like most people have the ability to change their minds. And
Yeah.
there have been times when like, I've probably said something, or I said something in a sermon like a year ago, where like now I probably disagree with myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's like it's all on the internet, and like you were preaching the word of God.
Mm,
And so there's just, yeah, it's like a weird kind of pressure. And
yeah.
I'd say
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
probably the most difficult
Um,
aspect of
I mean, but you
pastoring.
guys do get kind of controversial on your podcast.
We do, but I would say, it's funny. Like I would say, in the most Asian American way, you
I
know.
agree. You guys are very like cordial to each other and I love it. I love it by the way.
We love each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I did ask some people if they had questions for you before you came on, and
Hmm.
some really good ones came up. It's not really pertaining to like, when I grow up I want to be a pastor, but I felt like they are very relevant things. Especially okay, so for sure LA is very ahead, and I would even say progressive when it comes to, I think, the Korean immigrant church and the Asian American church.
Hmm.
We have very few models of that here in Atlanta. So I can't speak to any of the culture really, but so have you ever worked as a pastor or in ministry in the Korean immigrant church context?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I grew up in a Korean immigrant church, but
Uh-huh.
again, in Orange County.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I served and was very involved in like second gen Asian American churches on the East Coast, but
Okay.
never like in vocational ministry.
Okay. So maybe this is not relevant to you, but what do you think the future of the Korean American church is, and what is a model that will work between KM and EM? Do you have any opinions about this?
Ooh, that's a tough one. We actually did an episode on that on our pod as well, and that's a good question. Like
Okay.
with KMEM, I'll say this: I'm not sure, and I haven't really, to be honest, seen that many healthy KMEM models.
Yeah, it's tough.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure you could actually answer that question. Better than me.
Well, actually, no. At my church, I have it pretty good. My head pastor is extremely for the second gen and gives us a lot of autonomy. But of course, I have friends that work in ministry too, and it is a struggle. The tensions are real. The culture is real.
Yeah.
The
Oh yeah.
hierarchy is real, and um, yeah, but I will have to refer back to the Off the Pulpit podcast because I'd love to hear
Yeah.
what all three of you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, and we've probably changed our mind on
Right.
like half of those things by now. But I will say that I think I do think like there are like I love the idea of an interdependent model
Hmm, hmm.
when it's done well. And I would say one thing that would need to happen is I think the KM not only would have to give kind of like the EM and the next generation like their own autonomy,
Hmm.
but almost, and this part is going to be hard because of the cultural elements of it, but I almost feel like they at some point would need to put like give them the reins,
Mm.
like most of the models are like the EMs always get the bad service times, and they're supporting one another, and you can have autonomy, but still the KM is
Yeah,
the
like we still
mothership.
refer to them as the adults,
The adults,
like,
exactly,
like the
exactly.
parents. But we're
And I
adults and
almost feel
parents
like that.
ourselves, like
Yeah, no,
yeah.
exactly, and I feel like that has to be switched
Mm,
um,
mm.
for it to work in the long run.
Yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure. I think, culturally, just here in our city, this in Atlanta in particular, just yeah, I just don't think we're far enough ahead yet.
mm,
Like as far as like the types of families that live here. And but I don't know much. Just know kind of what goes on around me. Um, but Jason, I have to be honest about something. The reason my thoughts are really jumbled is because what you said about citizens and the original vision that was kind of killed and put to the side for a little while, like really excites me. And
hmm,
I can't stop thinking about it. And I think that's why I'm like, what am I trying to say? Because,
I'm so
because
glad.
for me, like, that's kind of like my dream.
Mm,
But like I never could put like words to it.
mm,
Um, I think so there was a time right before, like right after I got married, right before I had my first son, and right before I got pregnant, that a ministry partner and we had the opportunity to someone from the KM first gen said, "Hey, I have a space and it's empty and I want you guys to use it for second gen," right? And so
mm.
I'm like, "Okay," right? So we start working on stuff, but ever since I was like, I want to even say like in high school, I always had this idea of like, what if there was like a place that wasn't Starbucks where we could actually do something productive with our time and be resourced and like, like it's not just conversation, but it's like true fellowship that's happening and people are growing from it. And then with that, I just kind of, tabled it and then I just, lived my life and then yeah, it turned into this idea of like I mean, for me, the conduit right now is the podcast, right? Like
Mhm.
I would love, a place that what you exactly described, like, and to be able to like provide workshops, for young people that have no idea, like, what is Photoshop or like, what are these
Yes.
things that maybe I have an opportunity to learn as a young person and be even better as an older person. You know what I mean? And so you're talking and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's it. That's what it looks like.
I'll see you in
But
LA soon.
I I couldn't like yeah, I was just really shocked, I think, because in my head, like spaces like that, I'm like, okay, so if you talk to my husband or any other person that knows me, like I have a lot of ideas, but like none of them make money, Jason. Zero. Like zero money is made. And so my husband gets really frustrated. He's like, "That's great, hun, but like how are you like how can we, sustain, right?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea."
Yeah, I don't.
But
I haven't thought about that
yeah.
part, but just the beginning part.
But like everything you were saying, it just like makes so much sense. And for me, I always thought, oh, like I don't know, the only model I have would be like a coffee shop, right? Like that
Hmm.
would be the money thing, and then everything else would happen just around it.
Yeah.
But anyways,
I mean, because it was funny because when I was doing the SAT Academy, a lot of the parents would say they would drop their kids off and say, "Hey, is there anywhere I could get coffee around here for an
mm,
hour while my kids are here? Because I don't want to drive all the way back home."
right, right, right.
So it's like they're paying for the tutoring, but they also would love to just go grab a cup of coffee
And
for an
hang out,
hour,
yeah,
and hang out.
yeah.
And so, if they were all inhabiting one space, it would
How
be kind of awesome.
amazing would that be?
Hmm.
Anyways.
One
So
day, Lord.
so I'm
Yeah.
sorry. That's why I'm like, okay, what do I ask you? I have to like, I apologize. I'm so
No, not at
sorry.
all. This is great.
But
I'm so glad. It's so encouraging that you're so. I'm excited that you're excited.
yeah, like so please bring it back to life and then you can make one here
That would be
in
amazing.
Atlanta.
Yes, you'd be the
Um
first person I call if that
yes,
ever
oh my
happens.
goodness.
Yeah.
Please, please. We'll be happy to facilitate. Maybe one day. Please God. Well, Jason, with all that being said, like right now, what does the church look like for you? Like, what does your everyday look like?
Yeah. e- every day is very
Sorry.
different. Yeah. As people know, it's like pastoring is definitely not your typical 9 to 5.
Sure, yeah.
Um, it's. Ooh, I think I may have lost you. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely different from like a typical 9 to 5. I think probably easiest to like actually talk about more like a typical week.
Okay.
And I'd probably put it into like 5 buckets maybe. So like, and we're talking about maybe like an ordinary week, not like, you know, Easter or something,
Okay, okay.
which those weeks get crazy.
Yes.
But I'd say like the first bucket would be like just sermon prep,
Mhm.
which takes a good chunk of my time. And if you probably talk to pastors who preach week to week, they'll tell you that like all of life becomes sermon prep. Like
Mm.
there's the hours you actually sit down and you're looking at your commentaries and reading your books and writing. But then even when you're watching Netflix
Right.
and playing with your kids, every time you're like, huh, could that be a
A
sermon
sermon point?
illustration? A sermon point or something. So there's like that, which takes a lot of my time. I would say the second bucket would be pastoral care.
Mm.
And so that's like um, general counseling, premarital counseling, marital counseling, hospital visitations, like
Mm.
meals and coffee with church members. Um, Third bucket would be like admin. So a lot of email, responding to emails and, looking through forms and, creating like, yeah, admin, like the boring stuff. And then the fourth bucket would be like meetings, you know, um, all different kinds of meetings. Like we have all staff meetings on Tuesday, but I also have meetings with like different pockets of staff, like our education staff
Mm.
or our like worship and media staff. Some meetings are like more logistical, some are more ideation, kind of dreaming about things, kind of meetings. Some are like finance, business meetings. And so a lot of meetings. And then probably the fifth bucket is like the actual execution of everything. So like Sundays, teaching classes or seminars during the week, weddings,
Mm.
funerals. And so all of that in some way, shape, or form probably like is like in a typical week. But as you can probably imagine, like um, there's always interruptions
Yeah.
and emergencies and unusual things that happen in
Is it
ministry.
difficult for you, you know, because you're investing into people all the time. You're having these meetings, you're, you know, doing visitations and things like that. You know, how do you balance family and church life and the obligations that a pastor carries?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning that for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Um, I try my best now to kind of protect my time with family, so to create certain boundaries. And actually, the pandemic helped a lot with this
Yes.
in a weird way because um, I think I would have been the type of person that would have been prepping my sermon all the way up to the buzzer on Sunday. Like, I think naturally I would be like that. I'm kind of a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened during the pandemic was like, because we were pre recording our services, I had to finish my sermons by Friday,
Oh
you
man.
know, and we would record. And then like Saturday was just family time because I had already preached the sermon.
So
And
great.
then
Yeah.
Sunday, I actually just worshiped with my family, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
like a regular churchgoer. And that
Right.
was so important
Mm.
for us to start ministry like that.
Wow.
Um, and so like even now that though we're back in person, I've tried to keep that same rhythm. So I try to have my sermon done by Friday,
Mm.
and then I try not to do like Saturday afternoons are often there are like weddings or like first birthdays or like there
Mhm.
are things that I have to do, but for sure usually like Saturday morning and if possible Saturdays in general are like our family days, you know.
Wow. Yeah, I
Um
mean, I agree with you. I think the pandemic itself, like, forced those in ministry to just lay, like, because, you know, there were no events, there were no small groups, there were no anything like that. But in a lot of ways, even for our family, it was truly, in a weird way, a blessing as well. So I totally hear what you're saying. But yeah, I mean, I think even like growing up, right? Like even in the Korean context of church, like I think there is this weird stigma, right, with PKs, like pastors' kids and
mhm.
stuff. And even myself, I never imagined me being in ministry in this capacity and like looking at my kids and like, oh, like they are pastors' kids, you know? And I think the culture of the KM ministry, like Koreans, especially if they're in pastoral positions, yeah, like I mean, I saw it growing up. You know, the the amount of work they put in seemed to in their heads equate to their relationship with Jesus or their
Mm,
faith in it. Honestly, a lot of my friends who are pastors' kids like suffered from it,
mhm.
if I'm honest. And but as someone in ministry, there are parts of me that like kind of get it. And so like you saying that, you know, really protecting that time, I think is so important, you know, to consider if you're going into ministry or thinking about going into ministry and how you're going to navigate. Because again, it goes back to what you were saying, you know, about how, you know, should you invest in what what could be, or maybe in what's in front of you is what
Mm.
God is giving you now and being faithful to that, like your family. So I appreciate you sharing that part of your life.
Yeah, and I mean, just one of the things like sometimes I say this like I feel guilty almost saying this because sometimes I the thought crosses my mind like if I weren't married or if I didn't have kids, I
Mm,
could do so much more
mm,
in ministry,
mm,
you know? Like I could accomplish so much more.
mm,
And I realize, God has really kind of been working on that part of
mm,
my heart,
mhm.
and teaching me how to see my limitations as a gift,
Yeah.
to um, not only to keep me dependent, but also dependent on Him, but
Mm,
also to, um, yeah, in some sense, I think to protect me,
mm. Yeah,
um,
yeah,
and so, yeah, and that's something I'm learning like all the time,
yeah.
and so I think you're doing that as well. I mean, even the fact that you have to do this podcast at 11 p.m. your time, I mean, that's insane.
But at the end of the day, it's because we love it, right?
Yes,
We
yes.
love it is what it is. Well, I probably could talk to you for hours, Pastor Jason. But I will try to wrap it up a little bit since
Yes.
we are coming up to a little over an hour now. And thank you so much again for sharing so much of your story. I'm really excited to see the future of citizens and what is to come and how God will continue to use you and your community. But I always ask people the same question, and someone actually asked me to ask this to you as well. But it's usually like, oh, do you have any advice, like life advice? But also, someone asked, is like, was there anything that you wish you had known before going into ministry?
Mm.
I feel like that's kind of a tough question, but yeah. So, do you have any advice? It could be life advice, it could be about ministry, maybe someone that's thinking about going into ministry as a pastor, anything at all.
Yeah. I would say, um, don't worry or be afraid if your life doesn't make sense yet.
Mm,
Um, one of the things is like when I look at even my wife, something I always envied about my wife's life was always like she was one of those people who right after college went into the fashion industry and like never left. And it
mm,
was like clear trajectory, it was just moving up the ranks. I look at my friends who end up becoming doctors. There's a clear template for them to follow, and their years are already mapped out for them.
mhm,
And I remember when I became a pastor, like officially the pastor in 2019, um, at the time I was 30, 36.
wow.
And my first thought was, God, if I was going to end up here and if you were going to lead me here, why did you take me on that like wild ride through all these
Mm,
things that had nothing to do with this? Like why did you put such a passion in my heart for music?
mm,
And why did I give those 5 years of my life to doing it full time when I could have been in seminary then
mm,
before marriage with kids? God, if you knew I was gonna be a pastor, why did I go through all that heartache of starting that business and all those late nights, like, building IKEA tables in that hagwon, and like there were so many things where like I just felt so late, like
mm,
in the game, and I felt like all my peers, like by this point, have been pastoring for years. And like, how am I going to learn how to preach every week at this age
mm,
in this life stage? And how am I going to lead this church like in this time, and just felt so much imposter syndrome. And um, it was interesting. Like, I think it was like maybe a couple months in. So two things happened. It was a couple months in um, to pastoring, and I was like, I was throwing a pity party for myself about how like preaching every week is so hard to
It is
do
hard
because
though.
it is very hard. It is very hard. And how I was like, I'm so late and like I'm just
Mm,
like I'm such a rookie. And one of my friends was like, "Well, like what do you have to do, when you prepare a sermon?" And I
mhm,
remember saying, "Well, I mean, you have to study a text and then you probably have to find some kind of main idea or hook, you know. Because it's like a 20 to 30 minute like monologue,
mhm,
you have to build tension, and at the end of the day you're bringing people to the gospel,
mhm,
and you're trying to connect the story of the Bible, the story of God to their story."
mhm.
And the guy in passing just said, "Huh, that's sounds like kind of sounds like writing a song." And like I remember like he said it on a whim, but I remember like going home being like, "Huh, like when I write music, there was a
Yeah.
hook and there was building tension and there
Wow.
was connecting my story to their story." Um and then it was like God being like, "You think like I was sending you on this like wild goose chase. Like, Jason, I've been
Mm,
preparing you for this your whole life,
yes.
you know?
I love it.
Um like with the Hagwon,
Yeah.
like all those trying to start like something from scratch, being in the pandemic and trying like having nothing to work with and no
Yeah.
frame of reference. I felt like God was saying, "I've been preparing you for this.
Yes.
You've done this before,
Yes.
teaching youth and trying to connect with the next generation. When I see our youth students and our children,
Yeah.
I feel like God saying, remember that,
Mm,
And so, in some sense, like my encouragement I know there are a lot of young people who feel like, is what I'm doing right now gonna be like exactly what I'm doing later? Maybe, or maybe not.
mm.
But I think there's a deep like comfort and assurance that all of it matters, and God
Yes.
is writing a unique story
Yeah.
in your life. So
Absolutely. And I'm sure you can attest to when you see it all come together to like you can't I mean I've had moments like that in my life and then I start over and I feel like I'm in the trenches again. But however, in those moments it's like for me it's like oh how small I feel in the bigger picture of what God is doing not just in my life but the people around me. And so it really is a testament to like us not being in control, I feel
yeah.
like, and just trusting, which is really
Hmm.
hard.
Very hard, so hard,
So
so
hard,
hard.
but so good. Well, thank you again, Pastor Jason. Not to put you on the spot, but if someone maybe has more questions for you, would you be okay with me connecting you with them?
100%. Nothing I like to do more
Awesome,
than that.
awesome.
That's actually how I'm like. That's how I connected with Kevin. Like we met on Clubhouse,
Oh, you
and
did?
we met on Clubhouse. He just happened to be in a room I was hosting, and he reached out to me, and like that small connection led to us like connecting when he moved
Wow,
to LA, and now to see him like serving at our church
that's amazing.
and being awesome,
I did
you
not know
know,
that. That's pretty cool.
it's the
What a
best.
good
Yeah.
story. But yes, like he just said, Jason is totally up for chatting. So if you have questions, don't be scared. I feel like a lot of you maybe get intimidated because I would too. But this is us giving you permission to ask questions, and be resourced through this podcast. You guys, if you want to reach out, please feel free to DM me on social media, or you can email me at podcastwigu@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks again, Pastor Jason. Until next time.